Hey, so welcome to the UpLevel Podcast. And I'm so excited to have Margo Fowkes and Che Marville join me in this duo conversation. We're going to be continuing to talk about leading through crisis, chaos, and change. And I was lucky enough to meet these two remarkable women when we were asked to do a webinar for the Global Wellness Summit around navigating grief in the workplace. And I was blown away by the knowledge and expertise that you both had during that summit and that webinar. And so I wanted to invite you to come and share all of that and more with our listeners. So thank you so much for being here and giving us your time.
Such a privilege, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. I've been really looking forward to talking with both of you.
Yes. And I'm excited because I know that we're all very passionate about grief and grief in the workplace and how it shows up in organizations and with teams and individuals. And I think that it's so relevant for this topic around leading through crisis, chaos, and change. And so really want to start the conversation of, what are you looking forward to about this conversation? What excites you about this conversation? Or what are you looking forward to about this conversation?
Margo, do you want to go?
You want me to go first? So for me, what I'm really looking forward to is when we had our last conversation, I just found that I learned so much from both of you. And so I have this, or we each have our sort of set knowledge, if you will, and experience around grief in the workplace. And what I loved was that both of you brought up so many different aspects of it that I hadn't thought about, or suggested a different entry point or a different way to look at it. And that's what I'm most excited about, because it's a topic that I care a lot about, but I think a lot about too. And so I love learning new things about it or approaching it with a fresh perspective, which is something that both of you bring.
Well, I agree with all of that. And I think I think we are so hungry for real conversations within our networks that I actually think podcasting is a tool for having that, if you can have it with authentic people. And I admire both of you. You know, I felt like we were going to be lifelong friends after we met in November. And I felt like here are two women that I can learn from, I can grow with, but I can also collaborate with. And collaboration is something that I'm really very jazzed about and excited about and, have dedicated a lot of my life to. And I think that in terms of grief, I think we can't talk about it. I don't think we should talk about it all the time, but I also think we can't talk about it enough. And it's not just about the workplace. It's just that the workplace is that ecosystem that we are together in, but grief is everywhere. And it feels like everywhere you can't talk about grief. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that it's about both for you, it's learning and sharing, but also about, as you said, conversations that we need to have more, especially around grief. Yeah.
And growing, like just expanding. I really feel, you both know I lost my mom during the pandemic. Very shockingly, she died. She was really healthy and well, and very much a part of our living family and relationship. And so when she passed away, it was very shocking. And I had coached employees for years who had experienced grief and the loss of a parent, but I hadn't really experienced it, not at that level. And so it was such a important learning space when I lost her. And frankly, we're getting close to 3 years. And I feel like I am coming out of one level of grief just after 3 years. Yeah. And, that to me is just so stunning. So I take that into how I, care for employees and how I support people, because now I have a deeper understanding that I must admit I thought I had, but until I went through this, I didn't.
Yeah.
Not really.
Well, that leads me to, I mean, what you're bringing up is your individual experience, but also the universal experience of grief, and especially what the pandemic created for us, which is grief showing up in so many different ways. Obviously, the grief of people dying and losing of loved ones, but all the grief around loss of jobs, loss of ways of life, loss of community connection. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And people are still healing from that, or haven't healed from that, or haven't had the time to process that even, because life is chaotic. There's been crisis after crisis, and there's lots of change. And so I think you bring up a really important topic around how this is a long conversation you have with yourself and with others around grief. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to each of you share your journey of what led you to be so passionate about this work and do the work that you do? So both sharing a little bit about your own journey and what led you to do the work that you do inside organizations and with leaders and employees. Who wants to go first? Yeah.
I can go first. So I really stumbled into this in many ways, although I can also look back and see that the groundwork for this kind of work began a long time ago too. But I was thrown into the grief world itself when our then 13-year-old son Jimmy was diagnosed with brain cancer, and I've been a consultant for the last now almost 25 years, and I continued to work as he was going through treatment. And then towards the end, I took some time off. And my role is so different because I work for myself. I wasn't going back into a workplace. I didn't have someone saying to me, well, you've had your 3 days of bereavement leave, and when's that report going to be finished? I didn't have any of those experiences. But the experience that I had was the feeling that so, and maybe all of us, but certainly most of us get, which is that our brain doesn't work the same way after we've had a devastating loss. And so I took a bit of time off. And when I was facing going back to work, I wasn't sure that I could do it. It was hard for me to imagine standing up in front of a group of people and facilitating a meeting or giving a talk or doing a training. And I wound up just deciding I had to know if I could still go back to work. And so it was really a personal, self-focused experience. But what happened to me is, because I talk about Jimmy and I'm open about that loss, is that my clients and the folks that I was meeting through the work that I do around writing and talking about grief and loss started sharing their stories with me. And what I realized so quickly, as both of you know, is that we are so ill-equipped to navigate grief at work, especially. And that it's not from any malice. People just don't know what to say. And so it's easier to not say anything, or to feel like if I bring up the loss of your mom, Che, and what I don't know is that you're about to go in and give a big presentation, or you're about to head to a meeting that you have to run, and you get really upset. I'm very likely to think to myself, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake. I never should have mentioned it. It's my fault she's so upset. I'm not going to bring it up again. Right. And so it was all that kind of learning from these people that I was interacting with, as well as my own clients, that had me realize there's such a need to talk about this and to really help people understand that you have to talk about it, no matter how much you stumble or how awkward you feel. Yes. And that's what really got me engaged in this work, but also really passionate about working with it.
That's so powerful, because, I think you're so right. We are ill-equipped, and we also don't want to think about death. Most of us, right? And so, to have a conversation where you ask someone how they're feeling, it's not just that you're concerned about how they're feeling. It's like whatever is in you that is uncomfortable with the idea of death. it's very confrontational. And what I've observed is that emotions in general are something that people are very uncomfortable about in the workplace. Like we do not, even though we talk a lot about emotional intelligence, I feel like we are so far away from actually creating space for people to express their emotions and be cool with it. Like to be able to sit with someone's emotions and not try to solve for it or, make them necessarily feel better, but just be able to witness it. We don't have the experience in doing so. And I think when my mom passed, right in the middle of the pandemic, everything was changing in terms of work. I had worked with employees before. I had been in an organization where a very tragic thing happened where over a month, 3 employees had children or family member who died of drug overdose. It was just very shocking. And what was amazing was the way the community came and rallied around each of these women. And so, I had felt like I was just supporting and I'd seen myself as a supportive leader. And then when my mom passed, my brain changed. I had a very physiological response to my mom's passing. We had become such great friends, right? We were so close. And I kept having dreams about her in the first few weeks after she passed. And they were sort of odd. Now, they were either dreams or memories, but my family's from Guyana. And one of the traditional dishes is roti, and so my mom, she was an amazing cook. So she used to make roti and make it fresh. And I would dream of her hands rolling mixing the dough and rolling it out. And so I would have these experiences where at night I would disappear with my mom in a way. And then I'd wake up and I'd have this visceral, oh my God, she's actually fully gone. And then you have to pull yourself together. I have teenagers and, a dog and a husband and you have to go and meet people. And I do lots of presentations. So I found for the first time, I would want to also overshare. I would want to talk about her all the time. And what I started to observe was how freaked out people would be. You don't talk about death. You don't talk about losing your parent. And I wanted to talk about her. And so I felt like, oh, this is such an interesting place of learning now, because now I'm experiencing what a lot of people I've tried to help have experienced. And so now I have to rethink, how do I approach, but also how do I act appropriately? Right? How do you act appropriately in a culture that says, I don't want to talk about this, even though I do care about you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's so interesting because for you and for many others, the way to heal and process the grief is to talk about it and to be in conversation about it. And the flip side of that is if you don't, then you're isolated and you're not giving the grief the airtime. But on the other side, like you're saying, is that we're ill-equipped, or the organizations and the people who are ill-equipped to be able to hold space for someone who's having that experience like you're having. And so I'm curious, when you mentioned the organization that you worked with and they rallied around these 3 women.
Yes.
What was different about that organization? What were the behaviors or the mindsets that organization had that we're seeing missing in so many other organizations?
Ooh, that's so interesting. But before I answer that, I just want to say to Margo that, every time you share the story of your son passing, I just, I'm just blown away by your presence. And I'm so grateful for your honesty, and I just want to hug you. And, every time I'm just, and yeah, it's just incredible, how you share it.
Mm.
What I noticed...
And sorry, I want to just intrude, and how Margo, I just want to kind of build off what you say, is Margo, not only how she shares and her experience, but she then went off and wrote a book, and I'll talk about this in
Yes.
bio, but then she went off and wrote the book, Leading Through Loss.
Yes.
Shares so much expertise and knowledge, so taking an experience that you had and then creating from it, and sharing and passing on what you've learned, and then the people that you've worked with. Anyway, so I know we're...
Yeah. And I think we can get, that's also another point around the growth that happens from grief, which is hard to acknowledge because it's such a profound loss. And how can you grow and become something better or change or evolve out of the loss of someone that has been a part of you, I think is something that I also grapple with, because I do think I would prefer, obviously, that my mom is here, but I also think that her absence and the way she passed and the fact that I couldn't hold her because it was during the pandemic, created this other need, this other space to grow into something more than I was at the time. But I think what I noticed about the organization I was working for, that it's a development, retirement, luxury community, and they have them all over the world, and it was born here in North America, in Canada, in Alberta and BC. It was started by a real innovator in health by the name of Neil Prashad. Anyways, I'm not involved with the organization. I just love the people that work there. And they have a lot of healthcare providers, it's predominantly a female community. And, it was just amazing to me how everyone rallied around these women, and, started to do things like raise funds. They just rallied around these women because they were friends, and because the work they were doing in terms of looking after older people in the last part of their life made them a kind of family. And so when someone would lose a person in their actual biological family, the work family, and I know that people don't like to refer to your work colleagues as family. That's very controversial right now. But this group that I'm talking about were a family because of the kind of compassion work that they do. They immediately seemed to understand what the person that was grieving needed. And each of the people that had a loss needed something different. And because everyone was in relationship and connection with them, they were able to provide that connection. And I, as a leader, was able to support when someone said, I think we need to build a fund for so-and-so because they don't have the funds to help the grandchildren go through school. Okay, we can do that. I think we need to create care packages to help support them around dinner once a week. Okay, let's figure out how to do that. And also, when you feel like you trust your colleagues, you can accept help. When you don't feel like you're in connection and in relationship with your colleagues, and there's any form of distrust, you don't want them to know how much you're suffering, is what I've observed. And so this organization, I think, was able to support people around grief because there was a foundation of connection prior to the loss.
I want to underline two things that you said that are really important, which is one, that the needs of people who are grieving can be very unique and different. And that's something that showed up in this organization and shows up over and over again. Yes, unique is grief is universal, but how we experience it is unique to every individual. And so that it sounds like this organization was brilliant at being able to not do the same thing, not one size fits all for each of these women who were experiencing it. And then the culture of the organization that you spoke about was one that was built on connection, trust, and an inclusive and work environment where people felt connected and felt they could trust the people around them. So that's the pointer to all leaders and managers and organizations, that it starts with that. And we know that in many other ways.
And we never, I never once said, how long do you need to take off? So it was never, it evolved. Yeah. It was different for each of them. One person needed to come back to work right away. One person needed to stay away. One person needed to have some days, shorter days. Yep. And I think we have to also be able to adjust for individuals. And I think the difficulty with that in a culture or a world where everything is a system now, and, we have a lot of technology, we can sometimes take the human part out of the relational piece that we need in order to support people.
So organizations being adaptable and agile in how they are able to respond to those that are in need and experiencing grief. I'm going to throw this one at you, Margo, first, and then obviously want Che to continue. But how do you see grief showing up inside organizations? What are some ways that you see it showing up?
So it shows up, I think, in a variety of ways, some of which we name as grief and loss, obviously the death of someone, but also things like divorce, a diagnosis that's particularly scary, where we don't name it as much, and this is happening so much in the world right now, is when layoffs happen, for example, or even to the individual level, right? I put in for a promotion, I don't get it, right? Or I want to work on a particular team or in a different department, whatever, and I get told no. And there's a real sense of loss and grief around that. Now, it's not of the same magnitude, of course, as a death is. But at the same time, when you look at for example, with the layoffs, the folks that lose their jobs obviously are going through something really hard, right? They're looking for work. There's a financial impact, they've been taken out of this environment, which many of them probably enjoyed, liked being part of. And now they're, on their own trying to figure out what to do. We don't name that very often when we talk, using the language of grief and loss, but that's exactly what it is and what they're going through. At the same time, the folks that are left behind, if you will, are also going through a lot of grief and loss, because it might be my best friend at work who loses their job. I might know a lot about my coworker's story, how financially stretched they are, or how they might be the only person in the relationship that's bringing in income. And so I hurt for them in that way. And it isn't, there are things we can do in terms of, reaching out to our colleagues and all that, which feels actually easier when it's around job loss than when someone has died. But at the same time, organizations, I think, need to acknowledge that their employees who stay also go through something and make some space around that. I think we tend to sweep that under the rug pretty readily, like, well, you still have a job, we're going to march forward, we have a new vision, all these things, and we don't make the space to go through the transition from what was to what is true now.
So true. And I'm curious, what do you see organizations who are making space, or what do you wish organizations were doing more of in order to make space for that and those conversations and supporting their employees?
I think the biggest thing is just to allow some space and time for those conversations. 25 years ago, when I first got started as a consultant, I did a fair amount of work working with organizations who were doing these big layoffs, just like we're doing now. And I would get brought in to work with a team that remained. And a lot of that is coming together as a team and making a plan and focusing on where you want to go now. But it's also about just making that space to talk about how hard and painful it is to have a third of our team no longer here, and acknowledging that. Because the problem is that's what gets lost, right? If my manager comes in and pulls everybody together and says, all right, Rachel, Che, it's a new day. And yes, we're sad, but we've got to come together and move forward. What I'm thinking as a human is, wow, you don't even care that these people have lost their jobs. And it's so important to be human. And I think sometimes managers think, well, if I acknowledge that, then it's like I'm down this really slippery path of, well, it isn't okay. And then, the thing's going to sort of unravel. And I don't think that's true. I think we need to know that our leaders are human, and that they may have to do something for financial reasons, but it doesn't make it okay or easy. And acknowledging that, there's such power in acknowledging it. And sometimes I think we're so afraid of doing that it looks like weakness or something like that.
Yeah, so much power acknowledging it. And also because, if you're the one left behind, you're thinking, wow, I could be gone next week. And they're moving on to the next meeting and the next strategy and vision. And they haven't even thought about me. And meanwhile, I'm having my own experience. So you not only for the sake of the people that have gone and lost, but also for your own, knowing that the organization and your leader cares about you. They're invested in you. They care about your emotional well-being. Yeah.
I think there's an immediate disengagement for many employees because they think, whoa, like this is how they would treat me and they just don't care about me. And I think the word that comes to mind that I see a lot is denial. Like there's this kind of denial that is institutionalized. Do not acknowledge these negative things. Only celebrate the things that are good. Right. And pretend that the things that are hard do not exist. And I think what that does is it creates this inauthentic kind of workplace. And I think it creates distrust and a fear about communicating about truthful things. Right. And then this leads to the larger issue that we have because around the 5 different generations we have in the workplace now. Like we've never had this before. We've got 5 different generations, 5, not to lump people together, but I'm going to 5 different generational values and approaches to emotional well-being and emotional expression. And so when you have leaders who say nothing, and you have younger employees who have grown up talking about their emotions, being told that mental health is important and communicating is really important, and then you don't actually do that, there's a schism, there's a break. And you're immediately going to have people who are starting to look for other work. You're going to have people who maybe are less committed because they're like, why should I put in all this time? These guys don't care about me.
Yeah, they're not engaged.
Right. They're not engaged. And so I think there's a lot of complexity to the different kinds of loss and how you communicate and share and educate about the losses people are experiencing without, dwelling, but also giving people space to be, to just express themselves and to be able to say, I'm hurt that Che or Jack or Mohammed or, Ali or, are not here. Or, I'm afraid about my own, trajectory here because, I'm looking after an elderly parent or I'm a single parent or, I have a university aged human being that I'm looking after. Or I just feel like, or I'm at an age where I'm not sure if I'm going to get another job. Like all of these things are the things that are going to come up for people when they're seeing other people leaving or being let go or being laid off, or being terminated for whatever reasons.
Exactly. Well, and it also makes space for the other conversations that have to come, which is that if a third of our team lose their jobs, everyone who's left is going to be doing more work and different work and possibly work we don't want to do. And that also makes space to bring that up, right?
Yes.
And say, I'm drowning. I don't know how to do this new assignment that you just gave me because it's not normally something I do. And that conversation can be really productive for sure, because
Yes.
it's about the work and the mechanics of the work. But talking about how we got to the place where I'm overloaded or I'm struggling makes the conversation about the work itself easier, because I feel like I can bring it up and just say it's hard. Doesn't mean I won't do it. Doesn't mean I don't want to be a team player. But there's a feeling of relief to be able to say, I'm having a hard time, even if the leader has to say, look, I'm really sorry, but for now, we're just going to need you to take on this extra work until we can redistribute things and figure out what we're going to do. And boy, that sure makes it easier when people
can you like,
Yes.
rather than demanding it, it's like, what do you think your capacity is for this? Or what's another solution? Yeah, like is there a way to share the workload or to do it differently? I just feel like right now also we're in this huge experiment around work and where we work and how we work and who we work with. And so we can't be so rigid that we are not able or willing to have conversations with team members about how to do things differently in difficult times.
Right.
And so what would you, I'm going to ask this question both to each of you, directed first to leaders, individual leaders, and then to organizations as a whole. But what advice or pointing would you give to leaders who are navigating through crisis, chaos, change, all of the things that we're talking about, grief included? What advice or what behaviors, mindsets should they have? How do they role model this to their teams? Where would you point them?
So what comes to mind for me is that I think it's the importance of asking open-ended questions. What are you struggling with right now? What is hard right now? What feels overwhelming? What does support look like for you right now? Because we have to know what's happening with the folks that we work with. And by having that conversation, even if we have to say, no, I can't make that change, the fact that the person got to express how they were feeling, where they were struggling, what they needed, that alone is really, really important. And I think particularly now with, as both of you have touched on, these new work environments where we're working completely at home, we're working partly at home, companies are trying to force people back into the workforce in ways that are not productive, right? Mm-hmm. That we are not sitting at our desk or in an office or a cubicle or wherever 5 days a week like we used to.
Yeah.
And so there's a disconnection that by definition happens because we're on Zoom, like the three of us are right now, right? And so to me, so much of it is about asking open-ended questions and having regular check-ins. And they don't have to be long. It can just be a couple minutes right before we dive into the work at hand, but to just check in and be human and say, how are things going? What's coming up? How was your week? What's ahead? What are you concerned about? Those kinds of things. And then that way, as a leader, and maybe you can't make changes. Maybe you can't do something to help, but at least you're aware of what's brewing. Mm-hmm. And you've given people this open pathway to come to you and talk about what's happening for them.
Mm-hmm. That's such a good answer. I think the other side of it, though, is leaders need maturity and awareness. And I think there's something that I'm observing also over the last, 5 years in particular, but the last 3 years, because we've gone through, workplace and economic, technological transformation, is that there's a lot of people who are leaders, but they've not been trained to lead and to lead this new work generation of people. this multi-generational, multi-dimensional group of people. And this is a really hard thing for a lot of leaders, because part of what they do is know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if they themselves are unwilling to face their own concerns, their own fears, then it makes it very difficult to have compassion and apply compassion in an active, integrated way into the workplace or work environment that they're leading. And so you get a lot of performative behavior. And then back to this generational response, you have a lot of people who they want to know that you're real. Like they're almost like testing you all the time, to find out, is this leader really who she says she is, or who he says he is, or who they say they are? Do their actions and their words match? And so I think we actually have to coach and train leaders to actually look at their own behavior and their own mindset and their own emotional well-being and their own beliefs and values around loss and empathy and compassion and its application to the work environment, the work ecosystem, because I think many leaders are struggling right now. And because they don't have an exact or certain answer, I think they are maybe disconnecting some leaders. Mm-hmm. They're asking managers to do the work. Managers are almost like the sandwich generation. They're being pulled from the bottom and the top, and they're over capacity. And when you're over capacity, one of the first things to go is your sense of compassion and empathy and caring for people. And you start to get the wall,
Yeah. So I'm hearing from both of you, the two themes I'm picking up is one, that as far as with leaders, it starts within. There's a lot of work. It's about being the role model, that when you have a good relationship with your own emotions, when you have the capacity to be open and vulnerable about your own experience of grief or any other emotions and struggles, then you have the capacity to hold space for the team members around you and the people around you. And so it really starts with you as leaders doing your own work and being aware and conscious about that. And then, like Margo said, which is creating opportunities where people can just express themselves, to let you know how they're doing, having conversations about what they're struggling with, what they're experiencing, not because you can solve every issue or challenge, but because you care and you want to know and you're invested in them, which then leads them to feel like they're more engaged and you care about them.
And there's something else also, is that companies are there to make money. They're there to make profit, and they're there to grow. That's why they're there. And I think that a lot of leaders and managers think that some of this work that they call soft, that is actually human, doesn't lead to growth and isn't something that is about how they provide a better service or grow their profit line or, generate revenue. And I think this is wrong-handed because it's not just about having happy employees. I mean, lots of people are unhappy, whether they're employees or not, whether it's about work or not. It's about having engaged employees. It's about having employees who feel like they have the capacity and energy to contribute. When people are grieving, when they're suffering, when they're struggling, when they're feeling disoriented, when they're feeling discombobulated about their work and about why they're there or who they're working with, they have very low energy, their performance goes down. That is going to impact growth of the organization and the impact on, ultimately the bottom line. And so I think leaders, in learning about their empathy and building their own awareness, they have to also see the relationship between that and the growth of the business. It's like I think we can talk about it from a moral point of view and from a people point of view, and those things are important. I've done it. But I'm telling you, you lose when you stay on that side of things. It's the first thing to cut is, doing compassion work, doing empathy work, doing work that helps you be a better people manager when it's not connected to the actual growth of the business.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing that comes to mind too, Che, as you're talking about is this work around empathy and supporting teams, whether it's through mental health challenges, grief, loss, all those things. We don't treat that the same way that we do hard skills, right? So if I get a promotion and now I'm suddenly at a higher level and I'm managing people for the first time, or I'm taking on some new responsibility I've never had, there is absolutely no shame in going out and finding a mentor or talking to the people in the organization who know how to do this new thing that I'm being asked to do, right? But we don't give permission, encourage, provide pathways for leaders who are dealing with something they've never experienced, right? So if someone's managing me that has never lost a child, I would never expect them to understand what I might need or what that experience might be like, right? But there's often no place for the person who's managing someone who's grieving to go and say, help me. I want to be supportive. I want to do the right thing and say the right thing, but I don't know what that is. And so there's no mechanism, right, to find other folks who've done it or know how to do it well. And so what we fall back on is this notion of like, well, you should just know, right? As if there's some mythical script and pattern of behavior that you're supposed to exhibit that, we all know it's not true because we're all different and we all have different needs. But just like the three of us learn so much from each other, I mean, that's, within companies, that happens all the time, just not around grief and loss.
It's so true. But you know what the other thing I think about is, women started to enter in a more dominant way the workplace in the 70s, right? Mm-hmm. And like in terms of being, a stronger population in terms of employees and growing into leaders. And I think that we're still stuck in a model that served a certain framework around, not just patriarchy, but around how people work, and that there's this separation between your personal life and your professional life. And your personal life, you don't bring like certain emotional behaviors into the workplace. But now the workplace is in our house, right? Like, and even though there's laws and rules, right? Yeah. There are laws and rules around, don't send an email after 8 or 5 or whatever. Or don't send it before 9 in the morning, etc. The fact is, it's absolutely integrated. Yet there's still this sort of separation around what is appropriate behavior. And I think that for the reason I bring up the male-female piece is that I still think we're trying to figure out, what behaviors from a gender perspective are valuable in the workplace. And, when I mentioned the organization where we had these losses back to back and caring was the value that came up, that was an organization that wasn't run by women predominantly, but it was dominated by women because most of the people were care providers and nurses and they were predominantly female. I think it was 87% female in this organization. And, I know some people would say to me, well, just because there's women doesn't mean that people are going to behave and care. That's also true. But I do think we have to think about some of those things in relationship to gender and bringing, trying to bring more balance into what we value in terms of caring behavior within an organization.
Absolutely. I could go on and talk about this for more hours and hours, but I guess the place I want to leave us with is paint a picture of what you dream organizations to be like in the future. Like you've touched on some things. What what do you dream that organizations do around the topics that we've spoken about and behave? What's the dream? You're both smiling, so I feel like you've thought about this or you pictured this, and I'm just curious. Yeah.
So for me, I think it's so much around conversation and connection. So my dream is that when an employee dies or when an employee loses someone, that the manager, the leader knows immediately to reach out to that employee or that family and engage right away. And that the team is informed so that we avoid those really awful circumstances that I'm sure you've both heard about, where the person goes back to work and someone says, "How was your vacation?" And they have to say, "I was burying my mother, my child, my spouse," right? So that the communication is open and that it starts right when something happens, and that the team is allowed to be involved and to support their fellow employee in whatever way is comfortable, so that we give people both options and permission to show up in a way that works for them, but so that everyone is showing up somehow, right? And that might look like, I can't bring this up, it's way too scary, but I can write a card and I can leave it on Rachel's desk and say, "I'm so sorry that this happened. And if I can help pick up some of your workload, just let me know." Right. And that might be all I can do, but that's okay. That's such a huge thing. And so to me, it's about really, again, it's about conversation. It's about teaching people, what are some of the options to do to be supportive. And then through that, that person who is grieving will get what they need, not because they're getting the same thing from every person, but because they're getting enough from everyone. And that what Che talked about, which I just love, this integration of work life and personal life or home life, that allows space for that. So I get to bring my grief and my sadness to work and know that it's okay, and that people won't look at me and say, "Oh, well, yeah, she hasn't been as productive since her son died." They'll understand that it's a process, and that in time I will get back to some greater form of productivity. But right now, I need some extra help and support, and that's okay. We can make space for that.
Oh, that is the dream. And I think education is part of that dream, which is, I think, let's educate, everyone in the employee ecosystem, but I think especially managers and leaders about like the science around grief and loss, how it affects people's brains and how it affects their behavior, so that it's not that you just want to be respectful, but that you also want to start thinking about, workload and how you create space to support people differently. I was working again for this other organization when my mom passed away. And one of the most profound things that happened was the COO, right, of the organization, as soon as she heard, and she lives far away from me, she drove to my house. And it was during the pandemic, so we weren't supposed to be seeing each other. We sat outside and cried. And I sometimes think about that and think about just the level of generosity. She didn't know how I'd react. I don't even think she thought about whether it was the right thing or not. And I'm not saying everyone should do that. But we had enough of a relationship that she knew what to do. And there's something else here, which is, I think that there's a loss that you experience as the person viewing the person going through the grief. And what I mean by that is, if you're close to that person, you don't know what to do and how to heal that suffering that they're going through. And sometimes you don't even realize that your very presence is the healing. Just being present and sitting and listening and sitting on someone's doorstep and crying with them and saying, I'm here for you. I don't know how to be here for you. I don't know what to say to you. I'm confused about what's going on, but I also know that I need to be here. And I think she was a leader of that organization. And I think that a lot of leaders right now are in their attempt to be the one that knows everything, are also experiencing loss that is also not served because they're not being cared for. And there's a desperation that happens by having to be the person who always has the answer and not able to have the answer, and also has to be the person making the hard decisions around layoffs and around changing how people work or where they work. And so I just feel like right now we know a lot, but we still have a lot to learn about how to care for each other as we go through different kinds of loss and grief.
Absolutely brilliant. There is this theme around how do we equip and educate the leaders and then the teams that showed up, I feel like, in both your answers, Margo. Margo, it was more in both the leader knowing what to do and the team being able to step in and support. And then Che, it's around educating and equipping our leaders with their own resources, as you spoke about, because it can be so isolating and desperation. Being that leader that's meant to know what to do at all times, jump in, save the day, have the answers. That's isolating. And so supporting our leaders as well as equipping and educating. It sounds like those are two themes that I'm hearing more and more. And there are ways like this is the work that all three of us do. We go inside organizations and we support them to educate their people. Mm-hmm. We talk about the misconceptions of grief. We talk about the experiences of grief, how to support colleagues. So there is support out there and there's education out there. And I feel like, I don't know about you, but I feel like there's more organizations that need to be proactive around that rather than reactive, meaning we normally get a call to come and support after something's happened.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And actually organizations could start doing the work now. They don't need to wait for that. And grief is present now. And so equip your leaders, equip your people with the skills and the tools that they need for this. Yeah.
Yeah. And because overall, it is about creating not just a collegial or sort of holistic organization where people care, but it's about a productive organization, right? Where, there are different times where different people are stronger than others. And we have to be able to support that within the living ecosystem of the workplace. And I think right now, like when you say about like, what's the dream? My dream is that, we get to a place where we have that kind of like openness and receptiveness to the fact that we all are not always the same. We're not always working at this level. And we have ebbs and flows in how we grow and move through the work environment.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, we have to end this conversation because of time, and I'm so sad. And I feel like there has to be a part 2 of this because I think there were so many different topics that jumped up. Especially, I'm so curious about talking about the 5 generations and how that shows up to generational cultures inside organizations and navigating them. So I feel like there has to be a part 2. But yes, for our listeners, if they want to get in touch with you, and we'll have these in the show notes and we'll have this for all of our listeners, but what are ways that they can get in touch with you? I know there's many, but what's the best way that they can learn more about what you do or get in touch with you?
Margo. So either through my LinkedIn profile, that's a good way, or my website is OnTargetConsulting.net. And that has resources about, leading through loss, grief in the workplace, as well as other things.
Yeah, great. And I'll just point out that Margo's book, Leading Through Loss, every manager, leader, CEO, CFO, CEO should have it on their desktop, so on their on their desk. Che, how can people find you?
LinkedIn, Twitter, I guess now it's X, and CoachCheMarville.com, and I'll send you the link. But yeah, I mean, there's so many ways right now, right? But we've got it's an exciting time right now. You know, it's a very exciting time to be communicating about the things that we have for so long not been able to talk about.
Absolutely. There's a lot of work to do and a lot of
yes.
Yeah, absolutely, to make changes. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time, your wisdom, your expertise, sharing yourself. I have learned so much again, and I just enjoy being in conversation with you. So thank you. And I'm sure our listeners will feel the same way.
Thank you. You're always so generous, and thank you for sharing your platform with us.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Yeah, it's a joy to talk to both of you and spend time together.
Absolute honor.